A 39-year-old man has been arrested for allegedly raping and impregnating his 15-year-old daughter. According to reports, the father allegedly started violating his daughter in 2021 when she was just 12 years old. The child is pregnant again. This is the second pregnancy, and both pregnancies have since been terminated. We take a look at the scourge of young girls who are being molested not only by strangers but family members. We speak to Thoko Mkhwanazi-Xaluva, who is the chairperson of the National Children and Violence Trust. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your time this afternoon. To your understanding, what's going on?
I think, in my understanding, what's happening has been happening for quite a while. It's just that now maybe we're more focused and we're more aware. But also young people tend to tolerate something up to a point because they now are conscious that can't be correct. What my father is doing to me is not normal. So there's a better reportage than we had before. So this is how South Africa has been, but it's still very low in terms of cases that are reported. They're still not the actual, reflection of what is happening in the country.
What is the actual reflection?
Well, the research tells us that 60% of cases go unreported. So we're only seeing 40% of the reality out there. But we're hoping that the more we agitate, the more we have public awareness campaigns, the more people will come forward and report, especially children.
The public awareness campaigns, what do we want to bring awareness to?
Firstly, that you have a right. As a child, you have every right. Firstly, to report when something bad happens to you. And secondly, to make sure that you tell and tell and tell until somebody acts.
From the work that you do, speaking to young girls more so, we'll get into boys as well because some of them are also molested. But when you speak to young girls, what do they tell you about the perpetrators? How do they groom them? What do they say? What language is being used? How is it being done?
You see, the grooming happens by first winning the trust of the child concerned. If you're a parent, you're already 50% halfway there because your child trusts you. But an external person will want to be nice first. They're not likely to just jump on the child if they know each other. And, sweets and, some money changes hands and the man is seen as a nice man. They present themselves as being nice to children so that children might not be alarmed quickly. So they start softly and slowly. They don't start with the actual sexual activity. They'll start by touching, let's hold hands, let's do this, so that slowly by step by step, it advances to a sexual act. But it takes time to groom a child to be ready in your own terms as a perpetrator, that I think this child is ready for me now. They are very clever. There are those who just rape you the first time they see you. Maybe you don't know, is a neighbor or whatever, but the majority, especially parents and people who are very close to you or your relatives, will groom for quite a while.
What are we seeing when it comes to young boys being molested in the country?
It's the same thing, but for boys it's much more difficult to report than it is for girls. Because firstly, you're struggling with your own sexuality to start with, before you struggle with the act that has happened to you. Then you start doubting yourself, like, what happened here? What is this one doing to me? Because it's not something that we expect to happen, that a man would do that to you. But sometimes even women would groom young boys to be ready for them to have sex with. So, but boys find it difficult to report. We have seen a particular case where someone was sentenced to several life terms in terms of life sentence, but they are few and far between. Not that boys don't get molested, but it's harder for boys to report.
Are we equipping our young people to notice the signs? Are we equipping, more so when you speak of a family member where there's also some level of manipulation, so you're not sure because you get told if you tell, then you know this is what's going to happen, not threatened, but to say, well, you know, something bad will happen to uncle or something bad will happen to auntie, and so now you're confused as a child because you don't want this caregiver who's also inflicting pain on you to be taken away from you. And so are we equipping young people to look out for the signs?
You know, we shouldn't underestimate the impact, financial impact and reliability that children and their mothers go through. Because as a child, like this particular 12-year-old, she knew that our survival in this household depends on this particular man. And if I report immediately, then this man will go away. And what's going to happen to us? I think the systems, government systems, need to be much more tighter. They need to be available and accessible so that people know that we're not going to just be dumped all by ourselves, that there are shelters, that there are other services that government must strengthen. I must say some of them are there, but they need to be strengthened and they need to be more. But you see, we have the 16 days of no violence against women and children. We never get to the nitty-gritty part of what happens if a 12-year-old realizes that my father is going to be taken away. Or worse still, my father is going to start beating up my mother if my mother starts complaining about what he's doing to me. So maybe I should keep quiet. It took a lot for this particular child, who has had to have 2 terminations, to come forward and say, it's actually this man who's doing this to me. And I think we need to be much more vigilant when we have access to termination of pregnancy. When a 12-year-old walks into a clinic, what do we think is happening? Do we just treat this child as we would treat a 25-year-old who walked in? Something illegal has happened here. It's not just a normal thing. So the police need to be alerted. There needs to be social workers immediately given to the child, for the child to be cajoled and convinced to tell what actually happened. Because more often than not, it's a much older person who has done this to a child, and it can't be that a 12-year-old has consented to this activity. It's impossible.
Mkhwanazi-Xaluva, are we living in a normal society? Because when you speak of a caregiver where a child would walk through the door and they're terminating a pregnancy, you speak of a mother who saw this happen twice to her child and said nothing for whatever reason, financial or not, because some of the reasons, what are they? It can't just be about financial. You've got so many women who are struggling to put food on the table for their children, but they're doing it, right? And they're not selling their children. And so are we living in a normal society where you find sometimes, man, like a parent can harbor some sort of feelings towards their child that are not necessarily positive?
You see, as women, we struggle with a whole range of things. The fact that if this particular mother was away, she would keep quiet and allow her child to go through this trauma tells you that there's something wrong with the household itself, but also with the mother in terms of protecting her daughter, that this child was left on her own. But most probably, maybe the mother was not aware. We don't know. We'll find out more when the case gets to court. Because if she was aware, she needs to be arrested as well. Because it means she participated in this horrible activity that was happening every time in her child. It's not that this man would molest this child just once and the child would get pregnant. You know, it would be a bad coincidence. So it means this child was regularly being violated by the father, and she got pregnant twice. And eventually the law caught up with the men because the child decided, well, it's enough now, I'm not doing this anymore. But as women, we need to know that it's our responsibilities to protect our own children. We shouldn't protect the men for whatever reason, no matter how much you love this man. You can't love this man more than you love your own children. You need to protect your children more than.
Okay, I two questions as we wrap up. How do you give something that you don't have? Because you find that to love someone else, you must be able to love yourself. Now, you know, so there are people who are going through so many things where because of whatever reason, right? Like people often joke that when I was growing up, my mother would be short-tempered because I understand she had a lot to do. She was working 3 jobs, or she did this and she did that, so she was the circuit was short, but there was love. But then there are people where there's just no love. How do you fix that? Where maybe somebody was not ready to have a child, and now this is a constant reminder of how their lives has been ruined, etc., etc., because we've also got that. How do those people get help so that they're able to show up for their children?
I think the community organizations should do more outreach programs to reach those women, because it can't be, you can't be loving your child when you live with a molester. And you know this man is molesting your child, so you don't even love this man, probably. You can't say, no, you know, I love them. You love no one under these circumstances, and you probably don't love yourself as well. So there needs to be more interventions. There needs to be more community-based activities where women can then have space to talk and discuss about their problems. And sometimes we value marriage, not that there's anything wrong with marriage. We sit in those relationships, even if they are not working. People tend not to say, I'm walking away from this thing. And we need, as parents and people, or for extended families, cultural people, need to understand that sometimes there's a time to walk away.
What kind of men are we breeding if you have women who are grooming young children sexually? Because will those boys not grow up then to molest women or hold some kind of view about women? And then we wonder, so what kind of men are we breeding when we're violating young boys?
We are breeding very angry young men when we violate young boys. Because there's this anger, and there isn't enough space. I must concede, even myself as someone who works in this field, that there isn't enough space for boys to come through. Cases are few and far between, and they're very horrible. So boys don't tend to come forward, and they keep it within themselves, and the anger keeps building up and down, and the day they explode on somebody who wasn't the cause of all their anger. You know, when they say you're bleeding on me and I'm not the one who stabbed you. So they tend to then punish others who were not part of the abuse instead of coming forward. So there's a lot of work we still need to do, really.
It starts at home?
It starts at home. It starts with the extended family. It starts with the community. We need, because maybe the home is dysfunctional already. Then we need to bring in the relatives into this kind of fold to look at how they can assist.
Thank you so much, Ma, for your time this afternoon. Thoko Mkhwanazi-Xaluva is the chairperson of the National Children and Violence Trust.